The Republic of Congo is officially declared as the second biggest in history. And South Africa's ex-president still fighting to clear his name against corruption charges.
Shell is at risk of losing a multi-billion-dollar oil exploration license in Nigeria. And the US, Mexico and Canada sign a new trade deal in Argentina.
Begin with the major meeting of the minds in South America. We begin with the major meeting of the minds in South America. Argentina is hosting leaders from some of the world's biggest economies.
Shell is at risk of losing a multi-billion-dollar oil exploration.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The meeting of the world's top economies history. And South Africa's ex-president still fighting to clear his name against corruption charges. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live, coming to you from Nairobi. I am Penina Karibe. Also in studio with the day's preview of the business highlights is Uche.
Thank you, Penina. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Shell is at risk of losing a multi-billion-dollar oil exploration license in Nigeria. And the US, Mexico and Canada sign a new trade deal in Argentina. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Penina.
Thank you, Uche. We begin with the major meeting of the minds in South America. Argentina is hosting leaders from some of the world's biggest economies for the Group of 20 summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping is among them. He arrived in Buenos Aires earlier on Friday. The G20 gathering is taking place under the theme Building Consensus for Fair and Sustainable Development. World leaders are looking for agreement on trade and investment flows. Argentina has outlined 3 priority areas for the agenda. They are the future of work, infrastructure for development, and a sustainable food future. G20 members represent 85% of the global GDP, 2/3 of the world's population, and 75% of international trade. Before talks got underway, the G20 leaders posed for a group photo. They represent 20 of the world's major economies, both developed and developing nations. It's been 10 years since the first G20 summit took place in Washington, D.C. At that time, leaders gathered to figure a way out of the global financial crisis. The leaders will be aiming to reach consensus on a number of preliminary agreements on ways to drive global growth and sustainability. Let's take a look at some of the issues on the agenda.
This year's summit will be the Group of 20's 13th. Under the theme Building Consensus for Fair and Sustainable Development, it's the first time the meeting is being held in South America. The leaders will be focusing on 3 points in particular. The first, the future of work, or unleashing people's potential. They're hoping to create more and better quality jobs to ensure that everyone gets the chance to realize their potential and benefit from the new technological era. The second is infrastructure for development, which is mainly about mobilizing private resources to reduce the infrastructure deficit. Food security is an important link in the process to achieve peace and stability, which leads to the third, a sustainable food future. This one looks at improving soil productivity through sustainable means. It emphasizes that as a limited and non-renewable resource, the preservation of soil is crucial for sustainable development and life on our planet.
To the Democratic Republic of Congo now, the outbreak of Ebola in the volatile North Kivu and Ituri provinces has officially been declared the second largest in history. Around 380 cases have been confirmed so far. Community resistance as well as ongoing regional conflict has made it difficult for healthcare workers to contain the outbreak. In October, the World Health Organization agreed the outbreak did not constitute a public health emergency of international concern. The Ebola outbreak in West Africa between 2013 and 2016 culminated in 28,000 cases. It remains the largest on record. Earlier, Tarik Jasarevic, the spokesperson of the World Health Organization, gave us more insight into efforts to contain the Ebola outbreak.
Well, indeed, this is a sad milestone. We are continuing to see new cases of Ebola in DR Congo in the North Kivu province, despite a huge effort that had been put in place by national health authorities and partners, including the World Health Organization. From the very beginning of this outbreak, we have been saying that the context in which we are operating is very difficult and different from previous Ebola outbreaks we have been working in. This is the area of active military conflict that produces a number of incidents, security incidents, that is hampering our activities. You will remember that in September we had a couple of days we were basically grounded, we were locked in, we were not able to go out and do all these things we need to do, such as contact tracing, such as safe burials, treatment of patients, testing patients. vaccinating people. And same happened in November, where there was a number of security incidents involving even the UN peacekeeping mission. So we are operating in a very difficult environment, and we are really trying to do our best together with other partners to support national health authorities to bring the end to this outbreak. We will eventually do that, and we will not leave the area despite this challenging context, but it may take some time. We know what needs to be done. We have more than 300 people just from the WHO on the ground. The Ministry of Health has more than 800 people working on Ebola, and we need to continue the fight, and that's the only way really to beat the virus. Obviously, there are a number of different areas where we need to put our teams. We have teams in Beni, in Butembo. Luckily, we managed to stop the transmission in Mangina. That's the area 1 hour from Beni. But another really big challenge is infection prevention and control measures within health facilities. We know that lots of transmission is happening in sort of informal health facilities that are existing in Beni and around where people come for any sort of medical condition, but that get infected because also Ebola patients get there. So we really need to work on that, making sure that infection prevention and control measures are being applied even in those more traditional health establishments.
Let's go back to the top story now. The G20 summit is underway in Buenos Aires, and we go live now to CGTN's Jo Yun, who is standing by for the latest on that. Jo Yun, the summit has officially opened, but the most anticipated part of this meeting will be the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump. Tell us the agenda and the objective of this year's meeting.
Hello there. Well, the leaders of G20 member countries now in a plenary session where it takes place after the family photo taken early this morning, as well as the opening remarks delivered by the president of Argentina. Well, you know, every time we talk about the G20 summit this morning, it usually comes with three major priorities. And that being said, with the first one is the future of work, means, you know, the technological changes, technological development will not increase disintegration. And the second is infrastructure building, and that issue becomes especially important in so many countries now. For instance, right here in the host country of Argentina, about 60% of roads in this country are unpaved or, you know, waiting for renovation. So which means this country is in need or in great need of infrastructure building. And the third major priority is food, is global food security. But there's also one more topic. It is not appeared on among those three priorities, but still it catch great attention, and that, as you just said, this trade issue. And this actually matters is because it not only matters to some of the major economies here in the world, for instance, China or, you know, the United States. It is also consequential here in Latin America, in so many countries here in Latin America, as well as in your continent, so many countries in Africa. Because for those countries, if we take a closer look, a large number of them, their major trading partners are either the United States or China. So whatever outcome, whatever consensus, whatever result that will come from the summit will play a role in the future outlook of China, of the global economy. Another thing I just mentioned is I think the leaders of the G20 member countries will also spend quite some time in talking about communicating, coordinating the macroeconomic policy given the challenges and uncertainties faced by the global economic landscape right now.
And Jo Yun, let's delve into China's role in G20 on different capacities.
Well, I think this is an interesting question because there's so many different descriptions when it comes to the role that played by China in the G20 family. But if you take a closer look, I think there are two most frequently used terms. One is, you know, the economic driver, and the other one is team player. And for instance, I think this most obvious and prominent one is the economic driver, because we know from 2009 to 2011, China contributes to over 50% of global economic growth, and until now, it contributes about about 30%. So China is still one of the major contributors to the global economic growth. That is also the case in the G20 summit, the G20 platform. The second, I think, is also China has always been a very good and always very cooperative player, who tries very hard to push forward the agenda that concerns the world, as well as to make things happen. Here, let me give you an example. In 2016, during the G20 Hangzhou summit, China succeeded in having the G20 agreed to put the development agenda in the prominent position of the global macroeconomic policy. So that is actually the very first time in history happened among the G20 member countries. So I think it's fair to say that China has participated in every single major step in the history of G20, and also its contribution in this family is continuing to grow. Back to the studio.
All right, Jo Yoon, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much for joining us. Jo Yoon live for us there in Buenos Aires. Now back to the DRC Ebola crisis, and the outbreak of Ebola in the volatile North Kivu and Ituri provinces has officially been declared the second largest in history. Around 380 cases have been confirmed so far. Let's get some reaction from Kinshasa with CGTN's Chris Ochamringa. The WHO, of course, saying the outbreak is the second biggest in history. Chris, has the government reacted at all to the WHO's pronouncement on the magnitude of this outbreak?
Yes, the Minister of Health has issued a statement acknowledging that the outbreak is the second largest in the world, but he also said it's the first outbreak where many preventive and curative treatments have helped avoid thousands of deaths. He described Ebola as a disease with a social dimension beyond the medical response, and said it's the community that must decide to end the spread by collaborating and respecting prevention measures.
Chris, with elections on the horizon, how is Ebola featuring in the campaigns there?
Three presidential candidates I've listened to have spoken about Ebola. It's as an issue of serious concern. They've promised to improve the healthcare system if they're elected, and many other lawmakers who hope to go to parliament, potential lawmakers who intend to go to parliament, have also been talking about it. So we have one of the presidential candidates, that's Martin Fayulu, began his campaign in Beni, the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak, to show solidarity with the community there that's battling the deadly disease.
And lastly, Chris, how is the political climate we see now in the DRC conducive for an election?
That part of the eastern DRC where the Ebola outbreak has occurred is, I'd say it's not very conducive for elections. But the Electoral Commission has said that they will hold elections there. They'll just follow the guidelines from the Ministry of Health and WHO to ensure that people can vote in a safe and secure environment, so that there's no spread of this deadly disease.
All right, Chris Ochamringa on the line from Kinshasa, thank you. To South Africa now, where former President Jacob Zuma's corruption case has been postponed to May. Zuma served as president from 2009 before he was forced to resign in February. He's facing corruption charges in connection with a $2.5 billion arms deal dating back to the late 1990s. Zuma has been handed 16 counts of fraud, racketeering and money laundering. The former president spoke to his supporters outside court on Friday, vowing to continue backing the party that forced him out of office ahead of next year's elections. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take our first break this hour. Coming up, Uganda holds a day of mourning for the victims of the Lake Victoria boat accident. And ahead of the World AIDS Day, Rwanda marks progress it's made in HIV treatments.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Uganda has held an official day of mourning for the victims of last weekend's boat accident on Lake Victoria. More than 30 people died when an overloaded party boat capsized about 10 kilometers from the capital, Kampala. At least 27 people were rescued. Isabel Nakiria reports.
A nation grieving. Tributes continue to pour for those who lost their lives on Lake Victoria. One of them was a fisherman who tried to help when the boat went down.
It's a mourning day. We cannot just mourn from our offices. We cannot just mourn on TV and radio. And no, let's just specifically that Okecho who tried his best to save people and end up losing his life. We need to go and mourn with his family.
While the nation mourns, there are concerns about water transport safety measures. Lawmakers are calling for tougher policies to ensure the protection of passengers using boats and ferries on Uganda's lakes. Authorities say the vessel didn't meet safety standards. It was overloaded with as many as 100 people on board, many without life jackets. It was also not licensed to operate.
We need to rethink the regulations, whether they address the issues and whether they are being implemented. These regulations should be accompanied by actions, real actions.
The government is promising to do more to prevent boat accidents.
But we need to get back onto the drawing board and see what we can do so that we improve on the legislation, we improve on the aspect of the standards, okay, to make sure that everybody, because our aim is to make sure that there is safety and security on the waters.
The boat's owners, Templar and Sheila Bisasi, drowned. Although the wreckage and at least 33 bodies have been retrieved, scores of people remain unaccounted for. Authorities are stepping up patrols on the lake. It's hoped that with increased vigilance, incidents like this will become a thing of the past. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
UNICEF has announced that 2 out of every 3 children in the Central African Republic are in need of aid. The number of young people living in desperate conditions has risen from 1.2 million in 2016 to the current 1.5 million. There is only one pediatric hospital in the CAR, and it's overwhelmed with those lucky enough to make it to the nutrition ward. After fleeing their homes, minors are at risk of being used as sex slaves or child soldiers by armed groups. Surging violence, attacks on humanitarian organizations and funding shortages have increased the threat of famine.
The Central African Republic is quite possibly the most neglected crisis in the world. It is happening in the poorest, least developed country, and humanitarian workers are in one of the most dangerous places. Children's conditions are desperate, and 1 in 4 is either a displaced or refugee. But practically all children in this country need some form of assistance.
Saturday marks World AIDS Day. CGTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa sat down with 2 Kenyan students to discuss their views on the country's fight against HIV/AIDS. The 2 are members of BLAST, a youth-led organization that shares information about HIV and STI prevention, empowering students to make choices about their future.
What are the thoughts and the attitudes of the youth towards HIV and AIDS and STIs?
When it comes to STIs, I think most people are not really aware of the dangers of some of these sexually transmitted diseases because they are not yet vocalized in our communities. What people were really afraid of was the HIV, and now people are starting to embrace it. What we fear most is getting pregnant, and there are ways in which we can evade pregnancy. And some of those ways are like contraceptives, the implants. The funny bit is we don't really embrace a condom as an implant, as a contraceptive.
What are some of the challenges that young people are facing, and what are some of the interventions that could make a difference in the fight against HIV and AIDS?
We find in schools that the teachers are not well conversant with the HIV, and they find that that is not their business discussing HIV with the students. The work is to come, teach, get the basic knowledge, you go out, graduate and get your degree and move on with life. So I think if they incorporate it in the curriculum, it will do so much good to the students. They'll know this thing is serious. It's really affecting us, so they'll get well equipped for it.
The information is out there, but it's more of in the urban areas. You could say the youths are empowered in the urban areas, but if you cross over to the rural sides, you'll find the information is not yet home. Especially with a new infection, you'll find that if you try and look at the reason behind it, it's poverty related. So you'd find a 15-year-old is trying to make a living, and that would expose her to a lot of things outside here, and that leads as well to pregnancy and sometimes HIV. So what I would advocate for is the education, first of all, needs to be there. The knowledge needs to be spread across. And if there's a way girls can be empowered more in the marginalized areas, then that would help. If we can help curb poverty among the youth, because unemployment is also leading somehow to it.
More than a year ago, French President Emmanuel Macron said he supported the idea of repatriating African artwork that had been removed without permission. However, some French museum and gallery directors fear this may set a precedent. CGTN Stéphane De Vries reports.
This stunning building is the Quai Branly Jacques Chirac Museum. It houses the art collection of France's former colonies, but now the time has come to turn a page. President Emmanuel Macron has announced these artworks should be returned to their country of origin.
This museum alone contains over 70,000 objects from Africa, and giving all those back will put huge pressure on other art collections of former colonial powers, like the UK, the Netherlands or Spain.
The Republic of Benin in West Africa is the first to benefit from this new policy, much to the delight of this Franco-Beninese arts dealer.
It's a very important decision as a French president because the youth in Africa is very keen to know its history, and people want to see those objects back because they need to see their history back.
Yet there are also critics of the report, like Yves de Bie. He's a lawyer who specializes in arts trade.
Macron just received the report last Friday. He already said, "I will restitute the art." But the law hasn't changed. So what does it mean? They have made lists country by country. If the country is interested in any art object, a commission will decide what to do, and then there will be a bilateral agreement. That's not respecting the law. That's spin.
One of the controversial objects in this museum is the ceremonial throne. It contains Portuguese and Brazilian influences due to the intensive slave trade between South America and Africa. It will now be given back to the Republic of Benin.
According to Yves de Bie, it's risky to transfer artworks which has been kept in excellent conditions to the rather basic museums in Africa.
Belgium transferred 114 objects to Congo in the 1980s. Well, we made the inventory 10 years later. Almost all had been sold or had simply disappeared.
Unfounded fears, says Marie-Cécile Saint-Zou.
It's not going to be the emptiness of French museums. Some countries will ask, some won't, because some of them are very much in the cultural development, some are not, and they're not going to ask for 46,000 objects. That doesn't happen. It's going to be a cooperation, and French museum and African museums are going to work together, and I think everybody is going to be enriched by this restitution.
The restitution of artworks is a radical shift in policy, but it could also mean a fresh start of this sometimes turbulent relationship between Africa and its former colonizers. This is Stéphane De Vries for CGTN in Paris.
Let's head to Senegal now, where cinema professionals have met in Dakar for this year's Residac Film Festival. More than 32 countries from Africa, Asia and America were represented. The event celebrates emerging film, giving upcoming African producers and actors an opportunity to showcase their talents. Most of the films screened were by young African producers based in the diaspora.
The festival in Dakar is a gathering of industry professionals from filmmakers and producers to actors and critics. Organizers say it's an opportunity to raise awareness about African cinema.
In Africa, cinema is very important because we need to start educating our people to understand the importance of what media has done to us over the years. Media has portrayed Africa in a negative way, and cinema is one of those ways where we can change the perspective.
To grow the film industry in the continent, producers need to focus more on content and execution.
I believe that African governments have the duty and the obligation to support African cinema. We need to boost film productions in Africa. Even if filmmakers produce poor quality movies, people can watch and analyze those films to give directors feedback on how to improve.
However, one thing industry experts do agree on is that African film has grown in leaps and bounds in the past decade. They attribute this improvement to training opportunities offered by festivals like this one and exchange programs with international partners.
Get me a tracker in London. What we do in Ethiopia is that we make our own local film. We call it Ethio Cinema. I had the concept of Ethio Cinema. That means at that time, like 8, 9, 10 years ago, all the cinema halls was occupied by Bollywood and Hollywood. So we start to make our own production.
29 films were screened during the festival, most of them African. Noel Makugu, CGTN.
Sudan's government has launched a program to sensitize Sudanese nationals working abroad. In conjunction with Council of Scientists and Experts, the 3-day program aims to boost cooperation with international organizations interested in expatriates. Currently, there are 5 million Sudanese in the diaspora. The workshop focuses on immigration challenges and opportunities. Authorities hope the initiative will encourage expatriates to return home.
There is a large migration from Africa, and Africa is one of the largest continents in the world. We should focus on the survival of its scientists, experts, and young people in this continent so that Africa and the world will enjoy it.
In addition to the interest of the state and its care for the sons of Sudan abroad, who are estimated at about 5 million Sudanese all over the globe, constitute a support and economic strength and a moral one to the homeland. So our focus has been on a number of axes to manage migration in a positive way.
Relatives of passengers from missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 have handed 5 pieces of debris they believe to be from the aircraft over to the government. They're hoping it will prompt authorities to launch a new search. The pieces were found by villagers in Madagascar when, as recently as August, flight MH370 disappeared in March 2014 with 239 people on board. It was en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. So far, dozens of pieces of aircraft debris have been collected. However, only 3 fragments have been confirmed to be from the missing plane. They were found washed up on the Indian Ocean coastline. Relatives of the victims remain hopeful that the debris will eventually lead to the plane's wreckage.
I think the fact that debris is still washing up now, it means that this investigation is still live. And there are parties, private companies that are capable, who are willing to continue searching on a no-cure, no-fee basis. I think we should be more open to allowing them to do the search.
Recapping your headlines now, world leaders are meeting in Argentina for their annual G20 summit. The gathering comes amid tensions with Russia over Ukraine and a U.S. trade row with China. Saturday's meeting between President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart is among the most anticipated events of this summit. The outbreak of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo has officially been declared the second largest in history. Around 380 cases have been confirmed so far. Community resistance as well as ongoing regional conflict has made it difficult for healthcare workers to contain the outbreak. And former South African President Jacob Zuma's corruption case has been postponed to May. He's facing charges in connection with a $2.5 billion arms deal dating back to the late 1990s. Zuma has been handed 16 counts of fraud, racketeering and money laundering. That's a look at the hour's top stories. Let's now go to Uche for today's business news.
Thank you, Penila. And coming up on Africa Live Biz.
Shell is at risk of losing a multi-billion-dollar oil exploration license in Nigeria. And the US, Mexico and Canada sign a new trade deal in Argentina.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Well, let's start off in Nigeria, where lawmakers have renewed calls to revoke a license which was awarded to oil giant Shell, and that's following a report claiming the country stands to lose more than $6 billion in revenue under the existing contract. Now, Shell and Eni were awarded the contract in 2011, but exploration could not start after allegations of bribery were leveled against them. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more.
There are three main ways in which the government of Nigeria generates revenue from oil production.
Investigators commissioned by anti-corruption NGO Global Witness are presenting their findings to Nigerian authorities. At the center of the investigation is the award of an offshore drilling contract for an oil block called OPL 245, commonly referred to as the Malibu scandal. The deal involves oil giants Shell and Eni paying $1.3 billion allegedly for exploration rights. But investigators claim that payment was a bribe and that the money went to Malibu, a company linked to former Petroleum Minister Dan Etete. The report by Global Witness also alleges the terms of the contract deprived Nigeria of oil revenues.
There is more corruption because contracts are secret, and there's a global movement away from secret oil contracts because the discretionary power that's given to ministers and some senior officials often results in bad deals for the country. So the global standard now is to have contracts be fully disclosed when they're signed, and the more disclosure there is, the more likely it is that governments will get a fair deal.
Current and former executives at Shell and Eni are already facing corruption charges in Italy in connection with the deal. Italian prosecutors allege the officials knew that the money they paid was a bribe, a claim supported in the Global Witness report. Shell and Eni have denied any wrongdoing, but if Nigeria's lawmakers get their way, both companies could lose their prospecting licenses.
The position of the House of Reps that the Nigerian government must urgently review the OPL contract agreement, considering new discoveries that have provided further insights into the rip-off. The controversial terms on OPL C245 compromises Nigeria's potential revenue from the oil block, considering that the contract is hugely at variance with terms on which Shell had been awarded similar license in 2003.
Global Witness, an advocacy group known for its anti-corruption campaign against the exploitation of mineral resources, hopes exposés like this will encourage more transparency in the sector. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
And to South Africa now, the power utility Eskom has announced a 13-hour electricity rationing plan. The decision follows an overnight loss of the firm's generation units. The utility will cut 2,000 megawatts from the national grid. Now, the company is struggling with aging plants and delays in new facilities. Earlier this week, Eskom declared its profits had dropped by 89%. The power utility is discussing a turnaround strategy with the government. Now, the scheduled blackouts are a last resort to protect the system from total collapse. And staying in the country, authorities have launched a ground stability study in Johannesburg. This follows claims by the city of Johannesburg that illegal miners are operating in kilometers of tunnels and shafts under the city. They're blasting rock near gas pipelines and other infrastructure looking for gold. We'll hear CGTN's Angelo Coppola with more on that story.
The city authorities believe it's a disaster waiting to happen. But just how vulnerable are Johannesburg inhabitants to this illegal mining?
There are many concerns related to this, and I mean one of the concerns is the risk that a substance might be triggered as a result, and this could cause perhaps some difficulties to highways that cross over this mining area and also some fuel and gas pipelines which run through this area.
The Mineral Resources Department isn't convinced that there's a credible threat, and dealing with the illegal miners is more of a challenge, something that Minerals Minister Mantashe is adamant about.
There's an element of exaggeration and an alarmism.
Yes.
That's the issue. And we should not deal with problems that way. In any way, illegal mining is not a mining activity. It's a criminal activity. It doesn't belong to TMR, it belongs to the police.
The illegal miners are putting themselves at extreme risk in their search for gold.
There's no ventilation in place over there, so the air can be stale. There's also no new rock support being put in there to keep the roof up. And much of the work that they're doing underground is to scratch away and extract part of the pillars that were put in there to extract when the ore was originally extracted. So there's certainly a fair risk that they could be trapped underground and be injured and die.
While everything on the surface looks calm and normal, it's what's happening underground that's concerning everybody. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, British Development Finance Agency, CDC Group, has plans to invest $4.5 billion in Africa ahead of Brexit. UK government officials have been touring the continent, hoping to bolster ties with economies such as Nigeria, South Africa and Kenya. CDC has so far invested nearly $400 million in Nigeria to support SMEs. Now, after British Prime Minister Theresa May's visit in August, Nigeria's Naira was added as a pre-approved currency for buying goods in the UK. There are also plans to list Naira-denominated bonds on the London Stock Exchange to help fund infrastructure projects. And the leaders of Canada, Mexico and the United States have signed a new free trade agreement on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Argentina. It replaces NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. Here's CGTN's Owen Fairclough. He takes a look at how the revised deal differs from the original.
We have successfully completed negotiations on a brand new deal to terminate and replace NAFTA and the NAFTA trade agreements with an incredible new US-Mexico-Canada agreement called USMCA. Sort of just works.
The North American Free Trade Agreement transformed the trade of everything among these three countries, from avocados to the Zacaton root. That's used to make brushes. But Trump claimed NAFTA put Americans out of work with unfair trade practices.
It's one of the worst deals I've ever seen.
So how different is USMCA?
The goal of the Trump administration, their stated goal, is to bring back auto manufacturing to the United States.
And that means increasing how much of a vehicle's content must be made in its country of origin. Under NAFTA, it was just over 60%. Now it's 75%. When NAFTA took effect in January 1994, there were no e-commerce rules. Amazon didn't exist. USMCA has a whole chapter on it. And NAFTA all but fenced off Canada's dairy industry from competition. Now US rivals will have greater access to their market. But that goal of protecting American workers has already been tested. Automaker GM announcing it'll cut around 14,000 North American jobs just days before USMCA was due to be signed. And there are likely to be other losers.
If the auto production comes back to the United States, some workers will benefit. Consumers will lose, as this will make products more expensive, makes cars and cars parts more expensive.
USMCA took more than a year of often bitter negotiations and has to be ratified by each country's legislature. But for the US, there's a crucial get out. A sunset clause that means this trade pact is up for renegotiation in 16 years' time. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Well, that's all for now in Africa Live Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, we'll be bringing you more on former South African President Jacob Zuma's corruption case. Of course, all that coming up at top of the hour. For now, it's back to you, Penina.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. Moroccan teenager makes waves on social media for his culinary skills. That story and more after the break.
When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Do you see fast-growing, endless deserts and parched earth? Or do you see the biggest opportunity for an agricultural revolution in a generation? Do you see crowded, unplanned cities or vast, untapped markets? Do you see a population at risk? Or do you see a billion-strong opportunity to grow the next wave of multi-billion-dollar firms in Africa? When you look at Africa, what do you really see? Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
A Moroccan teenager has become a social media sensation after videos of him preparing meals and sharing recipes surfaced online. The young man is wheelchair-bound and hopes his culinary skills will inspire others.
13-year-old Omar Arshan was diagnosed with myopathy at birth. The rare disease tightens muscle fibers, limiting the use of limbs. However, it hasn't stopped Omar from pursuing his passion.
And I began cooking, because I'm a cook. I began cooking at 5, and I began my Facebook channel and my YouTube channel at 7 years old. Why? Because I had to use my hand, because I can't walk. I can move my legs.
His mother has started filming their cooking sessions, posting them online. They are peppered with positive messages. I won't hide the truth. We did live through a period of sadness and tears. At some point, we had to ask ourselves what we were doing and where we were heading. That was the moment that Omar's story began. I told Omar to see everything negative from a positive angle, even though I wasn't there myself. With time, Omar began showing me that it was all true. It's up to us to decide whether we will live in a negative or positive society. Despite the numerous challenges he faces every day, Omar is ever optimistic.
My advice is to keep smiling with the heart, not with the lips. Second thing, to stay positive, like to see everything nicely. Not badly, but nicely. And third thing is to keep hope. Because if you can do something, you will have to retry it and retry it till you get to it.
Omar plans to become a professional chef one day. And with willpower like this, anything is possible. Susan Mongeli, CGTN.
And now to Cape Town, South Africa, where a traditional Chinese medical practitioner has opened the doors of her clinic, aiming to spread awareness of and increase access to herbal medicine in South Africa.
Dr. Lee brought her skills to South Africa from China more than 20 years ago. Since then, her clinic in Cape Town has become a space for health and healing.
So anyway, Chinese medicine more and more popular because the treatment is much less side effective, and acupuncture almost not side effective. So that is and treat lots of condition, can dealing with lots of condition, and the medical aids pay for acupuncture so that people can afford to come in and dealing with the special disease. Some disease, Western medicine give a very good diagnosis, but for treatment, they are quite limited.
One of her clients came to the clinic battling chronic asthma. Tired of taking drugs, she sought a more natural way to deal with her symptoms.
They would give me antibiotics and cortisone, and I don't believe in taking that.
Now, she's a firm believer in Chinese medicine.
I think it's far better because they treat the symptom, they treat the cause, not the symptom. It's all a mindset. You know, if you think it's going to be sore and get yourself into a state, then it will be sore. But otherwise, you accept it and it's great.
Chinese medicine is a holistic way of addressing health.
In the Western medicine, use the hormone, use the antibacterial drug medicine, want to stop asthma. So the result soon will be found. Okay, take the hormone, take the antibacterial medicine will be less his symptoms. It's okay. But every day he take, cannot stop. But Chinese medicine is different. Chinese thinking, his asthma is not only lung problem. It's whole the body have some function, dysfunction. We must change this function. We use acupuncture to help him hold the body, so make his symptom less and less. So it's different.
Alternative health treatments have become a popular option for those who can't afford Western medicine. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
Well, it's time to get up, stand up, because reggae music has taken a major leap. UNESCO, the UN's cultural agency, has declared the music genre a global cultural treasure. Reggae joins a list of other protected cultural treasures such as the Great Wall of China. Jamaica's cultural minister brand named the announcement with a celebratory dance.
Hear the children crying, one love. Hear the children crying, one heart. Saying, give thanks and praise to the Lord, and I will feel alright. Saying, let's get together and be.
We consider intangible cultural heritage to be of extreme significance in a country's identity. And so in Jamaica, we are proud of the fact that this element of reggae music is one in which we often describe as that which we eat, sleep, and breathe. Reggae is no longer only ours. The world has now taken.
The woman fighting for freedom down in
The world has indeed loved the genre for a long time. Reggae music emerged in the 1960s in Kingston, Jamaica. Artists used it to call for a revolution and equality. Bob Marley was the genre's most famous ambassador, taking reggae music to the global stage. Older artists continue to enjoy popularity, and younger artists such as Chronix carry on the genre's message of change with a modern twist to the unmistakable beats.
Style strictly up, full vibes. I pick it up when the bills, them, the rent and the mortgage due. Yeah, yeah. When me chalice, when your best friends are gone and it's only you. Yeah, like a past split, turn up the music. Skanking sweet, everybody wanna feel like free. Forget your troubles and the rock with me. You know feel a reggae music sweet. Wanna feel like free. Forget your troubles and the rock with me. You know feel a reggae music sweet. Yeah. Skanking sweet. For every pain there's a melody. Yeah. For every trouble there's a harmony that brings everything together. So make we sing together. And who said life no order? And every man got this struggle. I beg you.
It fills me with great pride to know that the work we do, that the messages we spread have not fallen on deaf ears. People now understand that reggae is not a fashion phenomenon. It is about poverty, war, misery, not fashion.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports. Spanish football giants Real Madrid gear up for the Club World Cup.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
Cameroon's hosting rights for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations hang in the balance, with a decision over next year's tournament expected this evening from Accra, where the CAF Executive Committee is currently gathered. The 2019 hosting rights had been awarded in September 2014, and then CAF President Issa Hayatou, who is from Cameroon. However, at the time, the flagship football tournament had not yet been expanded from 16 to 24 teams. Reports from Accra indicate Cameroon may not be able to host the 32nd edition of the tournament, with construction and renovation work on the 6 stadia falling behind schedule. However, CAF President Ahmad had earlier warned that there was no plan B to host the tournament should Cameroon be stripped of hosting rights. Meanwhile, Spanish giants Real Madrid held an open media day at their training base on Thursday as they prepare for the upcoming Club World Cup. The UEFA Champions League holders will be aiming to win the competition for a 3rd consecutive season. The 3-time champions of Europe automatically enter the tournament in the United Arab Emirates at the semi-final stage. Real are due to play on Wednesday, the 19th of December, against the winner of the 2nd round match between Japan's Kashima Antlers and Mexican side Guadalajara. Since Santiago Solari took over managerial duties, Real have suffered only 1 defeat and have won 5 games across the league, Copa del Rey and Champions League competitions, scoring 17 goals in the process.
For us, it's always nice to have an opportunity to win a title, no matter when or where that is. And we can worry about everything else after that. It will sort itself out. But over the last years, we've gotten used to playing the Club World Cup shortly before Christmas. It's not the most attractive or popular event to travel to shortly before Christmas, but that's the way it is, and we are not complaining, as normally getting there is the hardest thing to do.
Now, as we mentioned, Cameroon's hosting rights for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations hang in the balance, with a decision over next year's tournament expected this evening from Accra, where the CAF Executive Committee is currently gathered. Let's now get more details on that. And Sadiq Shaban is standing by for us live in Accra. Sadiq, what is the latest from the CAF Executive Committee meeting there?
Well, Penina, as you've mentioned, the CAF Executive Committee meeting has been taking place here in Accra for the last 8 hours. It's been a marathon meeting, and we expect that the top leadership of CAF will shortly brief the media about their decision. That meeting has not yet ended, began at 9 o'clock local time, and is still going on at this time. We do expect to hear from CAF to put to rest the rumors that have been swirling around social media the entire day, talking about Cameroon's hosting rights for 2019. Well, we know that CAF has considered the options and the report of the Security Committee that has been in Cameroon for the last 2 months, and they will be discussing that in detail, looking at the stakes, the 24 team for the first time, and also the time is very short, considering that this tournament has now been moved to June next year. So speculative at the moment that Cameroon will not host this. In fact, there are reports that this particular tournament may go to Morocco, but this has not been confirmed. We are waiting for CAF to give us a final word on this. They will also be discussing the possible replacement, and we are getting reports that indeed CAF may have opened opportunities for about a month for other countries who want to bid for this event to put forth their bid. So Penina, in just a moment, we will know whether Cameroon will continue to host the 2019 African Cup of Nations.
And Sadiq, CAF president had assured Cameroon about their hosting rights for 2019. Is that now likely to change?
It appears that that position may have shifted, Penina, if what we are hearing so far is anything to be considered. We have sought comment from delegates who are here, but they have all remained tight-lipped, saying the final announcement will be made by Hamad. We know that the president of CAF, Ahmad, flew into Cameroon last month in the heat of the presidential elections and assured the Cameroonian President Paul Biya that Cameroon's hosting rights will be intact. But it appears the slow progress of preparations and the unfolding crisis in the restive Anglophone regions of Cameroon may just have thrown works in the spanner in the works, giving the executive committee a reason to look afresh at that preposition which was arrived at in Egypt only last month.
Sadiq, the finals of the Women's AFCON will be played on Sunday. What are the teams saying ahead of that final?
Well, at this particular point, Penina, in Cape Coast, about 2.5 hours drive from here, Cameroon is playing Mali in the third playoff match, and Cameroon is leading this particular final third place match by 3-2. This match is very significant because it will also determine who gets the third ticket to go to the World Cup in France next year. On Saturday, South Africa will attempt to write yet another history after qualifying for the World Cup. They will be attempting to unseat the holders, Nigeria, in the finals on Saturday. South Africa say they have already achieved a milestone, but if they get an icing on the cake while still about it, of course, that is what they will take home. For Nigeria, it's another routine final.
All right, Sadiq, I'm afraid I have to cut in there. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but thank you very much for that update. That's Sadiq Shaban live for us there in Accra, and that's where we leave it tonight on Africa Live. Do send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I'm Penina Kariba. Thanks for watching. Stand by for Global Business coming up next with Uche.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market shares fell today. They backtracked from an upward trend for the past month as we saw investors taking a cautious stance ahead of the high-stakes US-China trade talks, which we expect over the weekend. Now, in Nigeria, the All Share Index was propped up today by oil firm Mobil. We saw it climb about 9%. UBA Bank also up over 6% on the day. In South Africa, all eyes were on market heavyweight Naspers as it released its half-year interim results. Now, the company reported a 29% increase in revenue in rand terms to about $11 billion for the 6 months ending September 30th. Now, also coming up on the show today, former South African President Jacob Zuma appears in court on corruption charges. The G20 Leaders Summit kicks off in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And the UN-supported initiative that's making fishing a lifeline for communities in Kenya. Well, let's start off in South Africa, where former President Jacob Zuma's corruption case has been postponed to May. Of course, President Zuma served as the leader of the country from 2009 before he was forced to resign back in February. He is facing corruption charges in connection with a $2.5 billion arms deal dating back to the late 1990s. Now, Zuma has been handed 16 counts of fraud, racketeering and money laundering. The former president spoke to his supporters outside court on Friday, vowing to continue backing the party that forced him out of office ahead of next year's elections. Let's get an update on that case from Vanessa Da Silva Faria. She's a law expert and senior associate at Ulrich Roux and Associates. Very welcome to the show. Of course, she is joining us in Johannesburg. Now, former President Jacob Zuma's court appearance today, it did involve corruption, involving, of course, French arms company Thint. Now, give us a summary of the allegations against Zuma and certainly how damaging this could be for the former president.
Hi, and thank you for having me. So the allegations that Zuma is facing at the moment pertains to the allegation of bribery, essentially. And it deals with the issue of him allegedly receiving money from Thales, a French company, in return for giving him for giving the company rather political protection in the investigation into the arms deal. And in this deal, the Thales, the French company, obviously received a contract of $2.6 billion, and that in itself was under investigation. So the allegation essentially pertains to the fact that Zuma was receiving money and in return would offer them an unlawful political protection. And you know, this obviously is very damaging for him, as if he were to be found guilty of these charges, he might definitely face, you know, time imprisonment, and it's not an easy thing to go through. And I think if he has to be found guilty of these charges, or even further investigation and prosecution into these charges, might definitely open the door up to further issues that might come into play, and might, you know, deal with further things that Jacob Zuma's, the role that he's had in certain things will definitely come into question. So it's quite damaging for him as well as for his reputation, and I think it opens up a whole door of other things that might come through.
Now, of course, President Zuma is challenging these allegations. He's actually claiming that this corruption prosecution has been defined by political manipulation and blatant prosecutorial bias. Does President Zuma have a case?
Well, on that basis, and I would say not at all. You know, the essential thing in a application for a stay of prosecutions is whether or not there is actual trial prejudice. And that is the most important thing that an accused person, which would now be Jacob Zuma, that he needs to prove. He needs to prove that there is severe trial prejudice in the matter proceeding. And as a result of that, the prosecution needs to be stayed. And when I speak of trial prejudice, I mean it deals with issues like the unavailability of evidence or the unavailability of witnesses, or witnesses perhaps losing their memory. And that all links to the fact that an accused person has a constitutional right to a fair and speedy trial, and he also has the right to properly adduce and challenge the evidence that is presented. So on the idea of the prosecution simply proceeding as a result of political influence or prosecutorial biasness, that in itself is not at all a reason or ground for the application to succeed. One of the other things that must come into play is whether or not the state does have a prima facie case against Jacob Zuma. And if that is the case, then there's no reason as to why an application for stay of proceedings might be accepted or might be granted. And you know, there's very trite case law that deals with matters and that deals with application for a stay of proceedings. And one of the most important factors is that to grant a stay of prosecution in instances like this, it has to be an extraordinary remedy. It must be the only possible remedy that there is that will uplift the accused's constitutional right to a fair trial. And if it doesn't reach the limit of being the only remedy available, and there must be extraordinary circumstances, and if that's not presentable, then there's no prospect of an application like this being successful.
Well, we've heard so far that the case has been postponed until May 2019. So what do you expect to happen with the case between that time and certainly going forward?
Well, they now need to obviously follow the procedures. So the application was filed. The state must be given an opportunity to adequately respond to the application and to present their arguments against the application. Once that is done, the judge will then be able to hear the matter, and the matter must be argued on the 30th of May, or in May. Once the judge has heard arguments on the matter, the judge will then be able to give a decision. And if the judge does grant the application, and if the prosecution is stayed, then unfortunately that means that Jacob Zuma will not be prosecuted for the charges that he's facing. If the judge does not grant it, then the next step is for the state to then continue with the prosecution and to set the matter down for trial. So it'll be very interesting to see if the judge does in fact grant the application, considering that there's so much law pertaining to it, and it will be an extraordinary case to see what the judge might say on it.
Well, we will certainly be watching us in Johannesburg. Let's shift focus now and take a look at our corporate headlines today. Marriott International says hackers stole about 500 million records from its Starwood Hotels reservation system in an attack that began 4 years ago. Now, the hack exposed personal data of customers, including some payment card numbers, passport details, phone numbers, and email addresses. Marriott said it's first found out about the breach after an internal security tool sent an alert. The state-run utility says the power cuts are as a result of unplanned outages that are putting the system under strain. Now, Eskom has been battling to recover from a severe financial crisis, which has been compounded by coal shortages and poor station performance. The firm is expected to make a pre-tax loss of more than $820 million in the current financial year. Meanwhile, Rwanda's Bank of Kigali will spend more than half of the $67.5 million which it raised from a cash call this month to boost lending to local firms. A portion of the balance of the funds raised by the bank will go towards setting up a life insurance business, and about $10 million will go towards bolstering its IT systems to support digital banking. Meanwhile, German car maker BMW is exploring ways to improve working conditions for mining cobalt in Congo. This is through a pilot project supported by chemicals giant BASF, a battery maker Samsung SDI, and a German development agency. Now, the project will cover one pilot mine within the next 3 years. Currently, companies are facing challenges in the areas of environment, health and safety, and human rights when cobalt is extracted through so-called artisanal mining. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Let's head into a quick break now, still coming up on the show. South Sudan to launch its first mobile money service in January 2019. And Kenya's M-Pesa service goes global.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
And financial institutions to manage the platform.
This project is going to generate a lot of employment in the country. It is going to stimulate the economy. And like I already told, it is also going to breed a lot of young entrepreneurs in the country.
Mobile money transactions will allow people to pay bills and access loans, insurance and savings from their phones rather than going into a financial institution in person to complete extensive paperwork. The government says it will also reduce the risk people face carrying around huge sums of cash.
Financial services ecosystem in the country will really improve because now we will capture a lot of the people who are not bank, because the transaction within the mobile money, it will be really for those small people who are selling the tomatoes and the onions in the market.
Mobile money has been revolutionizing financial services on the continent, especially in East Africa. One challenge in South Sudan, however, is the poor telecommunications network. Much of the infrastructure has been destroyed during the war, but the government says it's working with the companies to expand telecoms networks and roll out the service to as many people as possible. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Meanwhile, Kenyan telecoms giant Safaricom's M-Pesa users are now able to send money instantly to users of China's largest payment and social media application, WeChat. Now, the partnership between Family Bank and London-based financial tech firm SimbaPay will enable users in Kenya to send money to over $9.7 million. Now, the cost of the transactions will vary on a sliding scale. Besides M-Pesa, Family Bank customers will also send money to WeChat wallets through the bank's PesaPap mobile banking application and USSD service. Now, revenues from the transactions will be split between SimbaPay and Family Bank. Well, let's get more on this major deal from Boniface Mungania, the head of M-Pesa products and services at Safaricom. Very welcome to the show, Boniface. Now, of course, this deal is quite major. It'll connect millions of M-Pesa users to 1 billion WeChat users over in China. So give us a sense of what this means for M-Pesa in terms of revenue, subscriber numbers, and certainly the expansion of the M-Pesa app globally.
Yeah, it's a good innovation by Family Bank and SimbaPay. These are basically two firms that are using some of the services that we give to financial services institution and other players in the financial service industry to then facilitate the kind of partnership they are looking at. But what exactly, or the role that you see M-Pesa in such a partnership is M-Pesa is sort of acting as the first point at which then money gets into the system that Family Bank want to use to remit money back to or send money to China.
Now, of course, this is not a first for M-Pesa. The app recently launched M-Pesa Global. Pretty huge. It partnered with Western Union to enable subscribers to receive money from abroad, as well as PayPal, which of course gives you access to over 200 million PayPal subscribers. Now, what are your targets for these deals? Any more deals of the same line in the pipeline?
Yeah, so you see what we've done in Kenya today, trying to displace cash and digitize as much as possible, is what now we're trying to open up to global players. And you see that our economy is opening. Many players are coming in, and international markets are opening to our country or to our citizens. And what M-Pesa is trying to do is bring the world to Kenya and take Kenyans to the world. We are opening global marketplaces and exposing Kenyans to international opportunities. So, for example, for a very long time, you realize that we've always been in remittance. We've been a net receiver, inward remittances. But if you look at what we've done this year, partnership with PayPal, over 200 million PayPal accounts globally. Western Union, over 500,000 locations, billions of bank accounts. The focus is now beyond remittances. It's remittances and payments. And what this is then going to do is opening a lot of opportunities for organizations that want to trade with Kenyans, and Kenyans are being facilitated to play in the global marketplace.
And are there any more deals like this in the pipeline?
For sure they will come. If you see the focus within a year moving from remittances to payments, then that tells you as more players come in, especially wanting to do business with Kenyans, then we are going to tie up partnership that facilitate that. Yeah, for sure, many more will come.
Now, of course, M-Pesa is also eyeing its expansion across Africa. It's done quite well in East Africa, not so well in the southern part of Africa, in South Africa specifically. What other markets are you looking to get into across the continent?
Yeah, our CEO, Bob Colimo, recently actually stated that, yes, we are looking for opportunities to expand across the region. And for now, there is nothing that we can announce, but this should be confirmed when anything concrete is
coming out in that. Now, how are you navigating the challenge of the numerous regulatory and certainly bureaucratic controls involved in the mobile money international market? Of course, you're working with World Remit, companies like World Remit, now PayPal, now Western Union. Have you had any challenges navigating that space?
So the innovations you see in M-Pesa today are happening because of a very close relationship with the regulator, and we have a very proactive approach when we're engaging them. So every other product, we always engage them when it's coming to regulation. But something else you need to look at is the partnerships you are doing with organizations with very high standards when it comes to AML and KYC requirements. And this is the same thing that these are the same standards we've kept for M-Pesa. Very good proactive approach and a very, very supportive regulator, and also getting partnership that then are bringing the kind of reputation you need. And it's been quite a good journey, rolling out various products and services with a very supportive regulator.
Well, it's certainly exciting. Many thanks for joining us in the studio, giving us more insight. Of course, that was Boniface Mungainia. He's the head of M-Pesa Products and Services. Now let's stay in the country, where a delegation of Chinese business people are exploring investment opportunities in the country. The group is led by the chairperson of the Council for Promoting South-South Cooperation. They have attended a forum which was hosted by Kenya's Export Promotion Council in Nairobi. And CGTN's Robert Nagile was there and brings us this report.
China is Kenya's largest trading partner, investor and contractor. The two countries have cooperated on more than 100 major projects, including the flagship standard gauge railway line. Now, Kenya is looking for investment in manufacturing and housing.
The president of China has said that he's opening up Chinese market for our products. And for Kenya, we have the Big Four agenda, and our president has been in the forefront in seeing that we have market access to China. So the Big Four agenda focuses on the manufacturing sector, among others.
China has welcomed the forum, saying it will improve investors' understanding of the business climate in Kenya.
This forum is important to get to know the investment opportunities in Kenya, because for a company willing to invest in a foreign country, information is key, so that Chinese investors can get the necessary information.
After 40 years hard working, China becomes the second largest economy in the world, the largest trade partner in the world, and also have the import and export of goods have grown 198 times.
China has listed Kenya as an example of the success of China-Africa Industrial Cooperation. Chinese enterprises have invested billions of dollars in research, industrial zones and development projects in the country. And Kenya is ready for more.
We are happy to assist all the Chinese companies when they come. We are situated at UAP building on the 15th floor, and we have a one-stop shop available and ready and working to facilitate the ease of Chinese companies and foreign and local companies to establish their businesses in Kenya.
This forum is a follow-up on the Shanghai Expo, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's go to Nigeria now, where lawmakers have renewed calls to revoke a license that was awarded to oil giant Shell. That's following a report claiming the country stands to lose more than $6 billion in revenue under the existing contract. Now, Shell and Eni were awarded the contract in 2011, but exploration could not start after allegations of bribery were leveled against them. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with more on that story.
There are three main ways in which the government of Nigeria generates revenue from oil production.
Investigators commissioned by anti-corruption NGO Global Witness are presenting their findings to Nigerian authorities. At the center of the investigation is the award of an offshore drilling contract for an oil block called OPL 245, commonly referred to as the Malibu scandal. The deal involves oil giants Shell and Eni paying $1.3 billion allegedly for exploration rights. But investigators claim that payment was a bribe and that the money went to Malibu, a company linked to former Petroleum Minister Danny Tete. The report by Global Witness also alleges the terms of the contract deprived Nigeria of oil revenues.
There is more corruption because contracts are secret, and there's a global movement away from secret oil contracts because the discretionary power that's given to ministers and some senior officials often results in bad deals for the country. So the global standard now is to have contracts be fully disclosed when they're signed, and the more disclosure there is, the more likely it is that governments will get a fair deal.
Current and former executives at Shell and Eni are already facing corruption charges in Italy in connection with the deal. Italian prosecutors allege the officials knew that the money they paid was a bribe, a claim supported in the Global Witness report. Shell and Eni have denied any wrongdoing, but if Nigeria's lawmakers get their way, both companies could lose their prospecting licenses.
The position of the House of Reps that the Nigerian government must urgently review the OPL contract agreement, considering new discoveries that have provided further insights into the rip-off. The controversial terms on OPL C245 compromises Nigeria's potential revenue from the oil block, considering that the contract is hugely at variance with terms on which Shell had been awarded similar license in 2003.
Global Witness, an advocacy group known for its anti-corruption campaign against the exploitation of mineral resources, hopes exposes like this will encourage more transparency in the sector. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's move on now to Burkina Faso, where several thousand people have taken to the streets of the capital, Ouagadougou. They're protesting high fuel prices. Petrol and diesel prices have shot up 12% over the past 3 weeks. Protesters are also demanding the scrapping of a bill that will curtail the right to strike. Now, the government has blamed rising fuel prices on international markets, as well as a need for increased revenue to fight terrorism. However, world oil prices have plunged around 30% so far, as worries about falling demand in a slowing world economy have taken their toll.
Most of our transport is by road, so if there is an increase in the cost of hydrocarbons, it will automatically have an impact on transport, which will lead to a general increase in consumer goods. So we believe that this is a strategic product, and the decision to increase this type of product should not be taken lightly.
Comrades, enough is enough.
We say no to this increase in hydrocarbon prices, which, inevitably, will have terribly damaging consequences on the populations and especially on the most vulnerable strata, and our determination to fight is unfailing.
And for quite a while now, some foreign portfolio investors have been exiting Nigeria. The decision by the U.S. Fed to gradually hike interest rates in order to attract investments back to the country is partly blamed for the outflows. Now, the situation has compelled the Central Bank of Nigeria to sustain its massive injection of funds into the forex market in order to defend the naira. But the question is, for how long can the Apex Bank hold out? Here is CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
$11 billion, that's how much Nigeria's central bank has injected into the country's forex market to defend the naira over the past 10 months. And it's all thanks to a robust foreign reserve. The gradual hike in interest rates in the United States and Nigeria's forthcoming elections have both combined to trigger foreign portfolio investors' flight from Africa's largest economy. But the man who runs the country's Apex Bank says it is still not time to worry.
The impact on Nigeria has been somewhat moderated, given that we have been able to achieve a stable exchange rate over this period, and also we have also not lost reserves. If we have lost, I would say just very marginal amount that we have lost.
Indeed, there's been a seeming stability in Nigeria's forex market for quite a while now. Foreign reserve currently stands at over $40 billion, giving the CBN enough headroom to continue to defend the naira. But with the price of oil falling dramatically over the past week, some are warning those reserves could quickly get eroded.
The central bank is doing everything to maintain exchange rate stability, and it cannot really afford to, at this point in time, when the country is approaching a national election, to allow naira to devalue materially. But its capacity to maintain that, or how long it can continue to support the market and support the exchange rate, will depend on what happens in the crude oil price market. If crude oil price should drop materially, as we saw in the past few days, then the CBN capacity to continue to meet and intervene in the market to keep exchange rate stable will be constrained.
The central bank says it will continue with its intervention in the forex market, hoping that crude prices would rally back up and that foreign portfolio investors who are fleeing at the moment will beat a retreat once the election is over.
Unlike the previous time period between 2015-2016, when the shock was very massive and adversely impacted on Nigerian economy and the foreign exchange market, during that time we saw zero inflow of flows. Till today, notwithstanding the fact that US Fed normalization program is going on, we still see reasonable flows into the country rather than a completely dryness in the flows into the country. This has helped, and it's all as a result of the confidence that the foreign investor community has had on our policies.
I expect that positively, foreign portfolio investors will come back to the economy once the election is behind us and the election outcome is accepted by the citizens, and the new government comes up, or the government comes up with policies that are market-oriented and friendly to the investing public.
President Muhammadu Buhari has promised that he will ensure that the coming elections are free, fair and transparent, something the investing public wants to hear. But beyond the elections, Nigeria will be keeping a close eye on price movement in the global oil market. It surely would not want prices to go south. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head into a short break. Still to come. The G20 Leaders Summit kicks off in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And we bring you more on the air purifier that's doing what 400 trees can do.
How will your world change today? What happens here? happens there, or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's headlines. Former South African President Jacob Zuma's corruption case has been postponed to May. He's facing charges in connection with a $2.5 billion arms deal dating back to the late 1990s. Now, Zuma has been handed 16 counts of fraud, racketeering and money laundering. The outbreak of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo has officially been declared the second largest in history. Around 380 cases have been confirmed so far. Now, community resistance as well as ongoing regional conflict has made it difficult for healthcare workers to contain the outbreak. And Uganda has held an official day of mourning for the victims of last weekend's boat accident on Lake Victoria. More than 30 people died when an overloaded party boat capsized about 10 kilometers from the capital, Kampala. At least 27 people were rescued. And that's a look at our headlines. Now, on the international front, Argentina is hosting leaders from some of the world's biggest economies for the Group of 20 summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping is amongst them. He arrived in Buenos Aires earlier on Friday. The G20 gathering is taking place under the theme Building Consensus for Fair and Sustainable Development. Now, world leaders are looking for agreement on trade and investment flows. Argentina has outlined 3 priority areas for the agenda. They are the future of work, infrastructure for development, and a sustainable food future. Now, G20 members represent about 85% of the global GDP, 2/3 of the world's population, and 75% of international trade. The leaders will be aiming to reach consensus on a number of preliminary agreements on ways to drive global growth and sustainability. Let's take a look at some of the issues on the agenda.
This year's summit will be the Group of 20's 13th. Under the theme Building Consensus for Fair and Sustainable Development, it's the first time the meeting is being held in South America. The leaders will be focusing on 3 points in particular. The first, the future of work, or unleashing people's potential. They're hoping to create more and better quality jobs to ensure that everyone gets the chance to realize their potential and benefit from the new technological era. The second is infrastructure for development, which is mainly about mobilizing private resources to reduce the infrastructure deficit. Food security is an important link in the process to achieve peace and stability, which leads to the third, a sustainable food future. This one looks at improving soil productivity through sustainable means. It emphasizes that as a limited and non-renewable resource, the preservation of soil is crucial for sustainable development and life on our planet.
Meanwhile, the International Forum for Governments as well as central bank governors of leading economic powerhouses are set to discuss policy on promoting international financial stability. Let's take a look at the bloc's purpose.
The G20, or the Group of 20, an international bloc made up of governments and central bank governors from economic powerhouses in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. The grouping dates back to 1999. It was convened for leaders to discuss international finance policy and address issues that go beyond the responsibilities of any one organization. The members enjoy 60% of the world's land area and 2/3 of the global population. G20 economies account for around 85% of the world's economy, accounting for nearly 75% of the world's trade. The heads of government and heads of state of the group have met annually ever since 2008. The leaders have focused particularly on international economic cooperation since that year's international financial crisis. the group's agenda has expanded, and it now also hosts separate meetings for finance ministers and foreign ministers. This year's gathering in the Argentine capital of Buenos Aires marks the summit's 10th anniversary. Under the theme of building consensus for fair and sustainable development, the G20 leaders are expected to share their views in the fields of trade and investment, digital economy, infrastructure, and climate change.
Now, of course, the host nation of this year's summit, Argentina, has beefed up security with tens of thousands of officers to ensure safety of the G20 leaders, while CGTN's Joel Richards reports from Buenos Aires.
Parts of Buenos Aires are in lockdown for the G20 Leaders Summit. The most important global gathering this country has ever hosted represents a major challenge for the security forces. Following protests at previous G20 summits, Argentina has left little to chance while hosting world leaders this week, with more than 22,000 security officers in addition to personnel from other delegations.
This is a situation we analyze minute by minute. We have command control in the Security Ministry and other center in the four national forces that are working on this event.
Argentina's Security Ministry has worked with security services from around the world and brought in special equipment, including from China. Much of the Argentine capital is now cut off. Residents in areas near where official events are taking place are also being searched. To help with logistics amid an unprecedented security operation, the government called a public holiday for Friday and even suggested that Buenos Aires residents should make the most of the long weekend and leave the city. This suggestion did not go down well. A sinking economy means fewer extra money for a weekend away. There have been protests over the economic situation and security concerns after a major football match was called off at the weekend. Activists say Argentina and its president Mauricio Macri should not be spending what they say is well over $100 million on hosting the G20.
We have a combination of very bad economic decisions plus the militarization of society, which is a very, very bad combination, and that is what Macri is doing, and they are using the G20 in order to do that.
Protesters have planned a march for Friday afternoon. The security minister appealed for a peaceful demonstration, but the hosts are not taking any chances. Joel Richards, CGTN, Buenos Aires.
Meanwhile, on the sidelines of the G20 summit, the United States, Mexico and Canada have signed a new free trade pact. It's called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. The deal replaces NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Leaders of the three nations inked the deal on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. This comes after months of high-stakes negotiations. Now, legislators from the countries are still to approve the pact.
In the United States, the new trade pact will support high-paying manufacturing jobs and promote greater access for American exports across the range of sectors, including our farming, manufacturing, and service industries. As part of our agreement, the United States will be able to lock in our market access to Canada and Mexico and greatly expand our agricultural exports, something we've been wanting to do for many years.
As I discussed with President Trump a few days ago, the recent plant closures by General Motors, which affects thousands of Canadian and American workers and their families, are a heavy blow. And Donald, it's all the more reason why we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our countries.
The renegotiation of the trade agreement also allowed our region to move towards a more inclusive integration that listens to the demands of our societies.
And of course, we will be bringing you more updates on the G20 summit as they come in. Let's move on now. German investigators have raided the offices of Deutsche Bank as part of a probe into potential money laundering by the Frankfurt-based lender. Now, 2 employees are suspected of helping clients set up offshore firms to launder money. CGTN's Guy Henderson tells us more.
Deutsche Bank is in trouble yet again. This raid is part of a new money laundering probe, which ultimately stems from the release of those documents which became known as the Panama Papers. A huge trove of leaked documents detailing the use of tax havens to shield the wealth of the super rich. Investigators are focusing on hundreds of millions of euros that pass through Deutsche Bank's British Virgin Islands operation. The bank issued a statement, confirmed the raid. It said it's cooperating fully, and it's understood that neither of the two staff members being targeted are executive board members. Deutsche's shares still fell 3% after news of this raid emerged, and that takes their annual decline to 48%. This is yet another blow for a bank that has repeatedly paid the price in the form of fines and lawsuits over accusations of money laundering. In 2014, the bank hired a former French central bank official called Sylvie Materat to strengthen its anti-money laundering system to meet new international standards. But as recently as September, the German banking regulator was warning Deutsche Bank that it still wasn't doing enough. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Berlin.
And in India, about 200,000 farmers have gathered in New Delhi, and they're demanding the government address the rural debt crisis. CGTN's Ravinder Bauer brings us an update.
Dhanpat Singh is a distressed farmer living in the northern state of Haryana. He is under huge debt and is almost on the verge of letting go. His downfall started 2 years back in November when the government announced demonetization to tackle black money. He leased a piece of land to cultivate carrots and make a killing. But all his dreams fell flat when his carrots sold at 1/4 the actual price.
I don't have any hope from this government. This prime minister is like an autocratic ruler from our history lessons. He did not give any thought or make any preparations before making the decision to demonetize our currency. He ruined us all. He ruined the farmers.
Singh took us to his village to meet other farmers. Most of them are under debt and don't know how to repay their loans. Singh himself has exhausted all options, including the farmer credit card provided by the government. The rising prices of fertilizers, pesticides and manure are making agriculture unremunerative.
Seeds are expensive, manure and pesticides are expensive too. So we take loans from moneylenders, we're forced to sell our land and can't make ends meet, and so we end up killing ourselves.
Singh and his friends gathered in Delhi with farmers from all over India to demand for a special session of the parliament to address their issues. They want the government to pass the bills of higher minimum support price of grains and loan waivers. Like Singh, all these farmers feel that the government has failed to address the agrarian crisis. Ravinder Bauer, CGTN, Delhi.
Now, Mexico's major cities are some of the most polluted cities in the world, but the country is on its way to turning its fortunes around. Puebla has a new type of air purifier, and the filtration system has won international recognition for its use of microalgae to clean the atmosphere. CGTN's Alistair Baverstock tells us more.
Puebla in central Mexico is one of the country's and the world's most polluted cities. But it's also where a new type of air purifier got its start. The filtration system has won international recognition for its use of microalgae to clean the atmosphere. It's called the Bio-Urban and was invented by biologist and entrepreneur Carlos Monroy.
Algae has the ability to break down compounds faster than trees. There is a statistic which tells us that 75% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the sea, precisely from these organisms. And over the course of a day, they can multiply 2 or 3 times. So this natural characteristic allows it to process large quantities of oxygen.
But don't just take Carlos's word for it. His invention recently won the prestigious Innovation Award at the Contamination Expo Series 2018, held in Birmingham, England.
Using only algae, the sunlight and a simple pump to push the air through it, the Bio-Urban purifier contributes the same amount of oxygen to the atmosphere as 400 trees. the enormous potential of the photosynthesizing algae has been harnessed across the city at heavy traffic intersections.
Alberto Vivas is the Minister for Transport in Puebla City. He says residents have embraced the purification system.
They like it when you can offer them more public spaces, that while you're in the city, you can have a place where there are trees, where it can be peaceful, that you can have a relaxing moment in the middle of it all.
There are plans by Biometech, the purifier's parent company, to install systems within the London Underground railway system. But algae's potential isn't limited to air purification. It's a science that biologist Rocio Ramirez says can change the world.
These small organisms, we can obtain fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, which can be used for food as well as energy and also for biomedicine. There are many organisms around the world which are betting on algae.
Developers say with just one device they can transform carbon dioxide and process enough oxygen equivalent to nearly 400 trees. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Puebla.
Well, let's shift focus now and take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices slipped further as growing inventories depressed sentiment in the market. That's despite widespread expectations that OPEC and Russia will agree on some form of production cuts next week. Now, gold prices held range-bound as we saw the dollar continue to tread water. And that, of course, was after US President Trump sent mixed signals about the prospects for a trade deal with Beijing. Let's take a short break now. Still coming up. We take a look at the UN-supported initiative that's making fishing a lifeline for communities in Kenya.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, from a priest to a shopkeeper to a multi-millionaire industrialist, Narendra Raval has become arguably one of Kenya's most influential entrepreneurs. He's behind Kenya's largest steel and cement empire with an annual turnover of $650 million. Now, he is also a philanthropist and has pledged half of his considerable fortune to charities across the country. Here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala with this story.
Born into a family of farmers in India, Narendra Raval is a self-made man. His humble beginnings did not stand in the way of his incredible success. Raval moved to Kenya at the age of 16, and after a few years of working as a priest, he opened a small rolling mill business, a factory or machine for rolling steel or other metal into sheets. His startup grew and expanded until it became what's known today as the Devki Group of companies, a conglomerate with steel and cement manufacturing facilities in Kenya, Uganda, Congo, and Ethiopia. With an annual turnover of $650 million, Raval is one of Kenya's top 10 taxpayers.
I'm putting up a steel plant, which is the first steel plant after South Africa in all Africa, which will make Kenya import-free of steel, which we'll be making from the iron ore. I want to make sure that I can give back to the country and also to the government. We want to make sure that we create the job, we industrialize the country. So if I am as an industrialist, if I don't do, who will do it?
Devki currently employs more than 4,000 people, many of whom started out with no experience but have benefited from training and in some cases a higher education funded by Raval.
I didn't have the experience when I joined, but now when I started working with him, I've learned so much, I've gained so much experience. Then again, when it comes to issue of the personal now issue, he has been like a father to me.
Devki Group of companies has changed many lives in the town of Ruiru.
Since I joined this company in the year 2005, we have seen a tremendous change, a lot of improvement, a lot of support in terms of the welfare of workers and to the environment, to the community within the Ruiru and Thika, Kiambu County and the whole of the country, Kenya.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has credited the businessman for strengthening trade relations between Kenya and his country.
In the long term, I will be definitely not going public very soon. We don't want to go public because when you go public, you lose the interest. And if you lose the interest, your shareholder loses the money. Many companies I have seen, I don't want to mention, people, our Kenyans have invested by buying the shares and the company has gone down and they're gone, finished. And that's hard-earned money of the people. And I will never commit that crime or a sin that I take the money from the public and then I am not able to give them the better return forever. So I want to see when my company is able to give better return than what they get and it is secured forever, then I'll go public.
Priest, business magnate, philanthropist, and now author. The 57-year-old father of three has recently published an autobiography. He hopes long walk to success will inspire other entrepreneurs to follow in his footsteps. Alexandria Majala, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, for more on Narendra Raval's journey building his multi-million-dollar empire, as well as the future of the Devki Group, tune in to Talk Africa on Saturday at 17:30 GMT, or you can catch the rebroadcast on a Sunday at 18:30 GMT. Well, let's move on now. The impacts of climate change continue to affect our rivers and oceans. Governments around the world are now looking to balance the sustainable management of our aquatic resources with economic and social benefits for local communities. Now, one unique way is a Kenyan fish processor, Victorian Foods, which processes fish skin, which is considered a waste product, into fish leather. The unique product is the firm's way of adding value to locally caught fish, as well as creating employment to the community. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with the story.
James Ambani is the CEO of Victorian Foods in Kenya's western town of Kitale. He started by working with about 300 fishermen in the communities around Lake Turkana in Kenya's northernmost region. These fishermen continue to provide Ambani's factory with Nile perch fish, which is filleted, processed and shipped around the country and abroad. Nothing goes to waste, including the skin that would normally not make it to the dinner plate.
Fish leather is it's considered exotic leather. It's like reptile leather, and you know the reptiles are endangered. We have crocodile leather or snake leather, which is endangered. But fish leather, it's a good alternative to that. You don't require CITES for the permit that you use to export the leather for endangered animal species. You don't need that. So I think very soon, as it gains popularity, there's going to be a lot of demand for it in the market.
There are various advantages to the use of Nile perch leather. Due to its relatively large size, the fish skins have wider surface areas compared to most fish skins. Fish leather clothing and accessories are unique and extremely durable, while also being a far lighter material than cow leather.
We have lots of finished products. We have shoes, we have jackets, belts, handbags, purses. The list is quite big. Also, the automobile world is now actually looking at motor vehicle interior finish with the fish leather. So it's growing, the demand is growing.
Kenyan designer Jamil Walji accepted a challenge to create designs made with fish leather. He was able to stun delegates and fashion enthusiasts by showcasing his designs for a blue fashion show held at Nairobi's Blue Economy Conference.
I was inspired actually to take the challenge to create garments with it, infuse our local fabric, the leso, together with the fish skin and the European materials. I wanted to bring out a combination that has never been done before, to bring out a totally new image and a new look to how we look at leather products.
The goal is to expand production and to ensure that 60% of those working on creating fish leather for Victorian foods will be comprised of local women and youth. Terry Wangare, CGTN.
Now, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. Nigeria's naira weakened sharply by about 1% on the black market to around 370 naira per dollar, which of course is its weakest since August 2017. But the Nigerian Central Bank says it plans to boost dollar sales to exchange bureaus to meet a demand. Now, Kenyan shilling firming up against the greenback today, helped by inflows from diaspora remittances as well as horticulture exports. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen, and you can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, have a great weekend.